Hello and welcome to the Payoff Pitch Podcast. I am Sean Zerillo, joined today by Charlie DeCirco to help you break down the 15-game slate for Tuesday, July 18th. Brendan Glasheen is out today. Guys, we'll be back for Friday. Charlie, going to go through our best bets, fade the public, underdog of the day, and some final bets. We're also going to talk maybe some futures that we like for the rest of the season and some dinger props because it is Dinger Tuesday as always. But let's get into our best bets first. My best bet cash yesterday. I would have gone back to the well with the under between the Tigers and Royals. Unfortunately, that total has moved out of range. I did like the under 9 again for today. So in terms of my best bet, going to go with my largest projected edge, and that would be the Pittsburgh Pirates, but particularly for the first 5 innings with Mitch Keller going against Logan Allen. Pirates a bit of a difficult team to project. They called up a ton of rookies recently. You've seen teams throughout the league like the Orioles, the A's, the Reds calling up a number of top prospects, top position player prospects. And it's just a little bit difficult to project some of these players who we don't have offensive splits for at the major league level, but still able to input data sources, projection data like we would for any other team. And just going off of where the lines are respectively for the first 5 innings and the full game, don't really understand why the Pirates are the same price in both halves, because Mitch Keller is a better pitcher than Logan Allen. The Guardians have a better bullpen than the Pittsburgh Pirates, but there's no reason why the price should be the same in both halves. Keller should be a more significant favorite for those first 5 innings. So I like Keller and the Pirates for the first half up to about minus 125. For the full game, you can bet them to about minus 110 or better. But again, there's about a 15 cent difference in my price target and in my projection for the Pirates between the first half and the full game. And there should be about a similar gap at the close in the betting market too. So just do not understand why the prices are the same. And I like the Pirates here quite a bit. Not quite a bit, but as much as I can in both halves for Tuesday. Charlie, I believe you might have action on the Pirates as well. We can touch on that later, but what's your best bet for Tuesday's slate?
Yeah, I do have action on the Pirates. We'll talk about that later. But my best bet for Tuesday's slate, similar to you, where you're splitting across the Pirates. I'm doing that for the San Diego Padres. Just Joe Musgrove against Alek Manoah. And this is, an interesting case of, is Alek Manoah fixed? I'm not buying that. If you look at his start against the Tigers, despite going 6 innings of 1 run, his stuff plus was still down on his slider, which is his money pitch. So I don't think that he's completely fixed. Obviously, he faced the Detroit Tigers lineup, which we've talked about plenty times, how they're not, great. And Riley Green was also out at that time. So you look at Manoah's numbers, his strikeouts this year significantly down, his walks up, bottom 15% in expected batting average and expected slugging. So I'm at what it is right now, a near coin flip with San Diego and Joe Musgrove on the mound. I'm not sure why they're not such heavier favorites. Yes, obviously, if you've watched the Padres out of the All-Star break, 3 of their 4 games, they held the lead and blew it. But I'm comfortable here laying it both in the first half and over the full game with Joe Musgrove. Musgrove, a 3.07 expected ERA. His strikeout rate is back, where we expected it to be after he slowly got integrated back into the season after starting the season on the injured list. He's got near identical numbers to last season where he was dominant, and he's got an even better hard hit rate and barrel rate this time around. Top 1% of all pitchers in chase rate, top 10 in hard hit rate. So I'm thoroughly impressed with Musgrove. I'm upset that I didn't fire when I looked at 200 to 1 to win the NL Cy Young a few weeks back. I'm as high as you can be on the Italian Stallion. I love the Padres here over the first 5 and money line.
So let's talk a little bit more about the San Diego Padres, because both of us added some futures right before the second half started. I bet the Padres to make the playoffs at about plus 300. Also added divisional futures at 35 to 1, some World Series futures at long shot odds as well. It might have been World Series at 35 to 1 or World Series at 45 to 1, divisional at 35 to 1. Whatever it was, it's all gone up since then, because as you mentioned, they've lost the lead in 3 of the 4 games that they've had since the second half started. But I do think there's value, and pretty clear value, on the Padres still to make the playoffs. Forget my projection where I'd put them at. Anytime you have Fangraphs and Pacoda both saying that there's not only value, but significant value on a futures bet, I don't even have to run my numbers because I know I'm going to be somewhere between those two. Were aligned even with the less optimistic of those two projections, and the less optimistic of the two projections right now for the Padres to make the playoffs is 25%. Fangraphs has them at 25% still to make the playoffs. So plus 300 implied odds. Pacoda, much more aggressive at 44%, plus 125. You could even throw that out. Just use the Fangraphs number, 25%. Currently, you can get as high as plus 425 on San Diego to make the playoffs. That is 19% implied. It is a 6% edge compared to that Fangraphs mark. Obviously, if you're using that Pacoda mark, it's closer to a 15% edge, but I think there's indisputably value on the Padres to make the playoffs at this point. They've been extremely frustrating to watch. Do not hit with runners in scoring position. They have one of the most aggressive general managers, and as long as they continue to stay somewhat in contention, I would expect them to try to add pieces rather than subtract at the deadline, or at least, hold steady and not sell off pieces and look to next year, because that's not how AJ Preller typically plays it. So the Padres to make the playoffs at this point, plus 425, I think is a value bet. I like that plus 300. Going to see where they keep playing and whether I want to add more, but I would imagine the number may not get much better than this. So Charlie, I'm sure you agree with that take based on what we've talked about, but you're actually willing to go a little bit even more aggressive based on where the Padres numbers have moved to at this point.
Yeah, I just added right before the podcast, obviously right before the air you saw, I added 65 to 1 to win the World Series. I think that the thing is, and yes, obviously to make the playoffs is a great value too. But when it comes down to it and how the Padres stack up, if they were to make the playoffs, and we saw against the Mets last year, they have Blake Snell, Yu Darvish, and Joe Musgrove. And that's as good of a 1-2-3 as just about any team in baseball. And their offense is as bad as it's been with runners in scoring position, historically bad. It's still a really, really talented offense. You're not going to find one that's better with Juan Soto, Tatis, the breakout of Hassan Kim. Machado is playing like a different player. And then you look at who's, and obviously you just talk about making the playoffs. I mean, I'm not as, I know you're higher on San Francisco than I am. Miami, more of a fraud. Milwaukee, more of a fraud. Even Cincinnati, I think the Padres should have no problem passing over the next few weeks and months of the season as it comes down to the wire. And it just feels like they're on the precipice of just 1 month of just like going 20-5. It's just a matter of if their bullpen can hold it down and they can hold these leads. But I mean, at 65 to 1, it's similar to when we bet the Phillies last year, and I was all over them when they were about 40 to 1. In a 3-game series or a 5-game series or a 7-game series, all it comes down to is, your pound for pound best starting pitchers and then your offense. And they have as good as an offense as anybody in the National League. And they have, and the big leagues for that matter, and as good of a 1-2-3 punch as anybody. So I obviously lower risk. I put only like 0.15 units on it again. I already added World Series and playoff futures before the Philly series, but adding a little bit more, I think there's still value on them. I just think that this is a team that it's only a matter of time. We might look back and be like, wow, at one point they were 44-50 and now they're World Series champs.
I mean, they were the NLCS last year. They rolled through the Mets. It seemed like they were underrated heading into those playoffs. And I believe they gave the Phillies a pretty competitive series too. So yeah, just to reiterate, obviously I mentioned the odds that Fangraphs Pacoda have them to make the playoffs. Their World Series odds are between 2.5% and 3.9%. So Fangraphs thinks the fair odds for San Diego right now to win the World Series should be about 50 to 1. Should say 39 to 1. And Pacoda would put that fair price closer to 25 to 1. So Charlie jumping in at a big juicy number, certainly something I think you can justify. I would just prefer to go the safer route, I guess, and bet their odds to make the playoffs. But I bet it across the board. I already bet them at, I believe, 45 to 1, I said, to win the World Series at the All-Star break. I had some preseason NL pennant as well. I'm trying not to go too heavily against the Braves at this point in terms of how I'm building out my futures tickets. I'm more looking at teams to win the AL pennant, not teams to win the World Series from the NL. So that's kind of how I'm targeting teams at this point. We can talk about the Orioles and the Blue Jays more in a little bit, but first, let's get to our Fade the Public section. Milwaukee Brewers getting 85% of the tickets, 95% of the cash against the Philadelphia Phillies. The public loving themselves some Julio Teheran today. I am with the public again. I was with the public yesterday on the Texas Rangers. I'm riding with the public on the Milwaukee Brewers today. I like the Brewers down to about plus 170. I also like the under in this matchup, the under 9.5. I just wanted to pull up my price target to give out the accurate price. Minus 115 or better on the under 9.5. So not a ton of room there because that is the number that I bet it at. But Teheran, looking at the underlying indicators for him, strikeout minus walk rate is at its best mark in a long time. That cutter that he's added to his mix has helped suppress hard contact. He has a 3.9 expected ERA. I don't think he is quite that good, but I think he's much more effective than the market has been giving him credit for the entire time. Whereas Aaron Nola, his strikeout rate is at its lowest mark since about 2019. Strikeout or his walk ratio is increased compared to last year. I've talked about the times through the order splits all year long, but basically 31% strikeout rate first time through the order, 17% by the third time through, and it dips that second time through as well. So Nola wears down continually in his starts this season, not something that has happened in years past. And Teheran on the Brewers might have the bullpen advantage in the later innings. So not for the first 5 innings, certainly, but for the full game, the Brewers at plus 170 or better, I think are a solid bet. If they can get this game to the bullpens tied and competitive. Charlie, any action for you on this game or any dinger props or any ways that you're playing Brewers or Phillies at all?
No, I'm staying away here. I think you kind of capped it perfectly. It's Brewers or nothing. I just am not keen on going against Aaron Nola. It's really interesting to see Teheran's turnaround. He went from being out of the league and in 2 years comes back and has become a serviceable big league pitcher. But I don't hate the underlook. I'm a big Nola fan, but obviously this season it's been a different he's been a different pitcher compared to last when I was able to buy low on him. So yep, staying away here. Just gonna sit back and watch and let Anthony DeBundo live tweet through it as if the Phillies bullpen shuts the door again, he'll surely be saying they're the best again in baseball.
The live overs against Nola around the 5th inning, always something I've been looking for in his recent starts because the third time through the order does seem to get a little bit hairy for him. So if I'm sitting on that under 9.5 pregame, maybe I'll look for a over 7, over 6.5 live if it's 1-1 through 5, something like that, 1-1 through 4. Let's do our underdog of the day. We are on different teams for Tuesday's slate. I'm going with the Cincinnati Reds. They were my favorite underdog yesterday. They still have to finish yesterday's game before they play Tuesday's game. And also, if you've tailed me on those bets, make sure to check your tickets at your local books because I bet both my tickets through domestic books. My money line was voided at one book. My total is still live at another. So I'll still count both of those against my season-long record because most books do use a 24-hour rule in terms of finishing those tickets out. But I did have my money line canceled, and I was actually very surprised because the Reds are probably on the verge of losing that game based on the situation the Giants have it in. But in terms of Tuesday's matchup, I do like the Reds again. You can bet them down to plus 111, currently plus 125 out there. Don't see a huge difference between Anthony DeSclafani and Luke Weaver. DeSclafani, technically, better expected ERA, 4.91 versus 5.6. But stuff plus, pitching plus actually points to Weaver being the better arm. Giants have the better bullpen. Reds have the slight offensive advantage, about 5% in terms of where I project these two teams out against right-handed pitching. But as I mentioned yesterday, as I've mentioned, throughout the season, the Reds are such a good base running team and the Giants struggle defensively. Both teams struggle defensively, frankly, but the speed of the Reds just puts more pressure on the Giants to make plays defensively. Even yesterday, Ellie routine ground ball nearly beat it out and they consider challenging it. Like you have to make plays so quickly against him or he becomes a free base runner. So the Red speed is game changing. Speed never goes into a slump. And I think it just raises their floor in an outing. But against a poor defensive team like the Giants, who might make mistakes, fail to turn double plays, likely to get Brandon Crawford back in there at shortstop with a right-handed starter on the mound, all things that I like in terms of the Reds for this matchup. Charlie, anything on Giants Reds? And then give me your favorite underdog for Tuesday.
I actually, the more you talk, the more I'm like debating on firing on like a Ellie or late night Lamont Wade home run prop, especially with the wind going out that way. Just think both pitchers have some issues that can lead to some long balls. But my home run, my underdog pick of the day, the Rays money line plus 120. You were on the Rangers last night. I'm gonna zigzag here with Tampa. Nate Eovaldi's on the mound for Texas, and there's been a bit of concern for him over the last month plus. If you look at his stuff plus numbers, he's outside that top 80, 90 range. He's really taken a step back from early season where he was dominant. His fastball grades out below average, and that's his main pitch. And you look, aside from his start against Houston in the last month, he's gone 17 innings, 10 runs, just 12 strikeouts. He's about league average in whiff rate. He's not striking out as many batters. He's giving up a few too many hard hit balls. His hard hit rate is in the bottom third of all pitchers in baseball. So when you look at his numbers, he's due for negative regression. His xERA and xFIP in that mid 3 range rather than in the 2s where his actual ERA is. And the opposite can be said for Bradley. Taj Bradley's on the mound. He's got a 5.43 actual ERA, but projections actually really like him. Expected metrics, 4.04 expected ERA, 3.35 xFIP. His biggest issue, a 65% strand rate and a 350 BABIP. So he is giving up hard hits, and that's been like an issue with him all season long in his rookie year. But every ball being put in play seems to be finding the holes. He's not able to mitigate damage, and then he's given up a lot of home runs, which has become an issue for him at times. 161 home run per 9. So I think all those numbers come back and positively regress for Bradley. He's got high strikeout rate, low walks. He's got excellent command. That's something that you really just look for in a young pitcher. So given the extended rest that he's having, and these offenses and bullpens kind of grade out about, the same for me. Texas a little bit better bullpen wise, but I'm comfortable laying the plus money here with Bradley, given how projections are kind of higher on him than Eovaldi over the next month plus, and how Eovaldi has fared in that last month where his stuff plus has been significantly down.
The series in general really intrigued me. Rays Rangers could potentially be an ALCS matchup. 2 of the best offenses in baseball, arguably the 2 best offenses in baseball, based on what they've done to date. But I think both of us are interested in potentially taking shots on some other American League teams in the futures market, and in particular from the very strong American League East, where every single team is above 500, and the Yankees are in sole possession of last place this late into the season in a very long time. And I think for that reason, we do like the Orioles and the Blue Jays respectively. I like both teams to maybe have some futures value right now. The numbers have certainly come down relative to where we bet them at the All-Star break. Both teams have played well coming out of the break, and the Rays have kind of slipped and given away first place, their big padded first place lead to a degree. That said, the Orioles, the Blue Jays, still very likely to make the playoffs, and the Orioles now getting into a position where they could potentially secure that very important first round bye. I like the Orioles quite a bit. The 2 young teams who have impressed me most this season are the Orioles and the Reds, all of the young offensive talent that these 2 teams have brought up. And I expect both teams to be very aggressive shopping for pitching at the trade deadline. Not only do they have the need, but they also have the assets to go out and get those players. It's just a matter of which assets they're willing to consolidate to get those pieces. Do the Orioles, with all these bats they brought up, trade a guy like Ryan Mountcastle? Did the Reds trade a guy like Jonathan India to get back some serious pitching pieces? I think it's very possible. And I would be very happy if those teams actually made those decisions and went out and did it and increased their chances of winning this year. But we saw Grayson Rodriguez look awesome for the Orioles yesterday. If he's able to keep that form the rest of the way, giving them Grayson with Tyler Wells and Kyle Bradish, who we're very high on, I would say, is an Action Network staff. And then they go out and trade for a guy like Lucas Giolito or Lance Lynn. The Orioles are very much alive in the American League, in the AL pennant race, and in the World Series race. So the Orioles at about 9-1 to win the AL pennant, 20-1 to win the World Series. Compared to the projections out there, not necessarily a plus EV bet. It's about a break-even bet. Their projected World Series odds right now and American League odds about 10-1 for the American League, and 20-1 respectively, maybe even closer to 21 or 22-1 for the World Series. So in terms of what's on their roster right now, I don't think you can necessarily say those are plus EV bets. But when you factor in the fact that they're likely to be very aggressive at the deadline, and also that Rodriguez might have shown that he's ready to bust out yesterday, I think the Baltimore Orioles are going to be a very dangerous team the rest of the way. And I think the books having liability on them might end up being a sweat for them in October. Charlie, I also bet the Blue Jays at the deadline. Thought there was value on both teams. Give me your case for why you like Toronto then, why you like them more now.
Yeah, I mean, I took them before the deadline and set it on payoff pitch, but just after this series too, this is, and you mentioned, right? You mentioned the Orioles are young and they could be buying at the deadline. I think the Blue Jays are going to be buying at the deadline, and I think that they're going to not be afraid to keep going all in. And what I value with them the most is I think their offense has the capability to go pound for pound with anybody. And I think that they're up there with one of the best in baseball. And honestly, with Kevin Gausman's breakout, or I guess continued breakout season, or, continued breakout, he's dominating this season. They have a legit number one. And as the rest of the rotation has kind of developed, we've seen strides made for Yusei Kikuchi and Jose Barrios, where they're no longer these pitchers that are just broken fade material. We faded them, how many times last year. They're not the same pitchers as they were in years past. And then if the Blue Jays go out and they get another bullpen arm, another rotation, an arm like Lance Lynn or Lucas Giolito, all of a sudden, I think that this team like can go pound for pound in a 5-7 game series, especially given that offense. And that was the biggest issue we saw last year, was I think that their starting pitching lacked. Their bullpen was so, but they still have the legit closer in Romano, and they have one of the best offenses in baseball. And they're a little bit more of a veteran presence, if you could say that. They're still young, but I just love this offense pound for pound. They added, like, with George Springer atop that lineup too, you giving some pad to Bichette and Guerrero, and having Brandon Belt also there. It's just, they added enough veterans. They're going to be buying at the deadline. I wouldn't be surprised to see this team make a run, and you can get it out there 10-1 to win the AL and 20-1 to win the World Series. I like both of them. I think they're going to be clearly in contention throughout the entire postseason, and pound for pound can match up with any team in the American League.
The AL does feel wide open. The Jays also the number one defensive team in baseball as well, plus 47 defensive runs saved. Kevin Kiermaier in center field, giving them a massive boost. They're plus 22 defensive runs saved in center field. No other team is higher than plus 11. So the Jays outfield defense has been absolutely tremendous, adding Dalton Varsho in there, moving George Springer to a corner. They catch everything. And that will make bad pitchers look a little bit better than they are. And I think Alek Manoah is a big key in sort of all of that analysis. If Manoah is able to get back to not what he was last year, because that's not coming back, but what he was expected to be last year based on his underlying metrics, which he did overachieve compared to. But if he's able to return to that kind of form, I certainly think the Jays are dangerous and live. I'd prefer Baltimore's bullpen if it gets, though, into a tight game, late game situation. But that would be a really fun series. I think Jays, Orioles against the Rangers, against the Rays, any of those four teams, you mix in the Astros too, and you have a really fun 5-team group vying for the American League, not to mention whoever comes out of the AL Central as well. Let's talk about our final bets for Tuesday's slate. I already discussed the Pirates earlier, but Charlie, I'm going to throw it to you because you like them too.
Yeah, Mitch Keller's on the mound. He seems to be an Action Network darling. He's gotten even better than last season, and 3.38 expected ERA, his career best hard hit rate, right around that 30% mark. We've seen him higher strikeouts, less walks, and he's at home, which I think is bigger here. 2.63 ERA at home. That number jumps up over a run on the road. Keller's biggest issue is with barrels, and this is a Guardians lineup that does not really barrel the ball. There's obviously Naylor and Bell can get into it, and Ramirez, but for the most part, this is a contact team. They rely on batting average on balls in play, and Mitch Keller has been, great, fantastic at limiting hard hits and inducing soft contact and getting outs. And then Logan Allen, I didn't know, you didn't really touch on him that much. Just about a league average pitcher, about a 4.5 expected ERA, below average in just about every metric across the board. He's coming back from a minor league stint, got sent down now that Shane Bieber is injured. But as the season progressed, we saw him kind of struggle a bit more. He gave up more hard hit rate, a higher hard hit rate. He didn't strike out as many batters. His whiffs were not really coming along as much as, teams got more information on him. So I think at a coin flip here, as you mentioned, Keller is very undervalued. So I like the Pirates here, both over the first half and the full game as well. And then, do you want me to give out my Dinger Tuesday prop?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
All right. I'm going Mookie Betts again. I gave him out yesterday. He hit one to the wall against Grayson, but Tyler Wells is on the mound for the Orioles with the wind blowing out, and Tyler Wells' biggest issue being barrel rate. He gives up an 11.5% barrel rate. That is bottom 10% in all of baseball. I think Mookie Betts is more than live to do it, right? We mentioned just him in the home run derby was absolutely horrific, but he is one of the best power hitters, arguably. Not actually a power, but he has up there with home runs in baseball, top 3% of all hitters in expected slugging. He has just absolutely crushed the ball this season. And he, in July, has been a different hitter with just about hitting about 400 in the month. Obviously, yesterday's 1-for-5 performance brought that down a bit, but more than live here. The wind's blowing out. Tyler Wells is on the mound, who gives up a lot of barrels. And I think Mookie is at plus 320 is more than live to get over the fence here.
Going with Matt McLain for my dinger pick of the Cincinnati Reds. Wind should be blowing out very aggressively to left field. He popped one last night. Anthony DeSclafani also has an above average home run rate allowed throughout his career. So going with Matt McLain of the Cincinnati Reds, I think you get a bunch of homers potentially, though, in that Giants and Reds game, which makes it a fun game to place a dinger prop in if you're getting that bonus return every time somebody pops one out. In terms of my final two bets, straight bets for the actual slate, the Rangers and the Rays under 9. Charlie talked about Nathan Eovaldi struggling late. Certainly a concern of mine. One thing we didn't mention when I talked about Toronto being the number 1 defensive team in baseball and discussing that on the heels of the Rangers and Rays matchup, Texas number 2, Tampa Bay number 4 in defensive run save this season. So these are two of the best defensive teams, in addition to being potentially the top 2 offenses in all of baseball. Why these teams are so strong, why they played so well this season. They're really good on both sides of the ball. I would say pitching, or particularly the bullpens, have been the biggest weak spot for these two teams. Aroldis Chapman upgrading that to a degree for the Rangers, and the Rays with, how they build their pitching staff throughout a year, I would expect to be better by playoff time. But do like the under in this matchup, made the total around 8.2, 8.1. So you can bet the under 9 to about minus 122, or an under 8.5 up to about minus 103. And then lastly, the Cubs and the Nationals also going under here. Don't love doing it in a game involving Patrick Corbin, one of my favorite guys to bet against. But Corbin's been pretty solid of late. Found a groove at some point midway through last year. Seems to be doing it again to a degree this year. His expected ERA is in the low 6s. That's where he was last year too. It's really tough to project him much better than that. I have his model weighted ERA at 5.55. So that's what I'm using for Corbin currently. I could move it a touch higher and put him at 6.25. Even then, I still wouldn't have this total above 8.5. And I think there is some upside for Jameson Taillon too. He's really struggled since coming to Chicago this year. A lot of metrics moving in the wrong direction, but did have his best start of the season. In his last outing, 8 shutout innings against the Yankees in what was technically, I guess, a revenge game. But, Taillon going forward and Corbin going forward, I think both guys will outpitch their expected ERA by about a half a run over the rest of the season. So I made this total 8.2, got some wind blowing in, triggered some Action Live systems for Wrigley Field unders. But regardless of that, I've bet against that system this year. I still like the under based on my number. Similar price target to the last game, about under 9 to minus 120 or under 8.5 at even money. Charlie, anything on those games?
No, I do. I was looking at the Cubs, but they're such a heavy favorite. I want to find a way to fade Patrick Corbin in some capacity, but it's always hard when, especially with how well he's been pitching of late, despite expected metrics being where you mentioned. But yeah, nothing from me there. Pretty light slate altogether from me.
Yeah, same for me. Pretty light slate, 15 games, but does not necessarily mean that we will have 25 or so bets as I normally do on a 15-game slate. No reason to force it. We've still got 2.5 months left of regular season on top of the playoffs, and that will do it for us. We will be back on Friday with another episode. Thank you for listening. For Charlie DeCirco, I'm Sean Zerillo. Make sure to download the award-winning Action Network app, and you can get all of our picks in there and also find our content on actionnetwork.com. See you next time.